Hello, and welcome to Mind Your Head, a space for people to share their stories, talk openly and honestly about their own mental health challenges, and to give some listeners some comfort in knowing you're not alone. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we record this podcast, the Gubbi people. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples. We honour their enduring connection to the land, waters and culture, and recognise their invaluable contributions they make to our communities. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Cooper, welcome to Mind Your Head, mate. It's such a pleasure to have you on today. I'm actually a massive fan of yours. I love the work that you're doing. I love the podcast, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it soon. But firstly, I'd love to go back and get to know you more personally and where you grew up and what the family dynamic was like growing up.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the support of, the work that I do and sharing that. It's really nice to know other people, who are doing work in this space and, trying to share conversations. They've seen the stuff that I do and get a bit of inspiration from it. So I appreciate that. But bit of my background, well, I grew up in Sydney, Northern Beaches, beautiful little place called North Narrabeen. Very nice place in the world to grow up, especially as someone who, as we'll probably get through my story, ended up being a professional surfer. So North Narrabeen's quite globally renowned to be a great wave for surfing, but also a really hotbed of sort of competitive surfing. A lot of world champions have come from there. People like Damien Hardman, Simon Anderson invented the 3-fin surfboard. Just a lot of history and culture when it comes to surfing in Narrabeen. So born there, grew up there. My parents are still in the same family house over 30 years later, which is really cool. So
that's cool.
Still get to pop back and go back to the old family house.
Lots of memories.
Lots of memories. So, yeah, I would say blessed childhood. I wouldn't say super privileged. I've got 3 sisters, so mum and dad, had to try and get by with 4 kids isn't an easy thing. So we always kind of had enough, but never had more than enough. And just sort of made it work. So very fortunate. Once I got to about 9, 10 years old, I was very active and very competitive, I guess you'd say. So from like 6, I played rugby union. Quite high up in sort of like state level, made it to played for the Warringah Rats. I mean, you're a rugby union, yeah? You probably know the Rats.
I know the Rats.
You know the Rats, yeah. So I played for the Rats until I was like 13.
Yeah.
And then everyone started getting really big and I was like, you know what, I'd rather go surfing than get smashed by dudes twice the size of me. But no, we had a good team. We won state titles a few years. I played with like Clint Gutherson, who's a
at the Dragons now.
He's at the Dragons now, was at the Eels, but back when he played, as most good, young players will play both disciplines, rugby league and union. So he was 5'8" to my halfback, and I lost all my kicking duties. I lost kind of everything to do with any being the star player.
Was he a gun back then too?
He
was
a
he?
weapon.
Really? So there's no surprise where he sort of
not
ended
one
up.
Bit of surprise at all. He was just the weapon from the get-go.
Yeah,
Kind of came. We were a really good team, and he came from another team to join, the best team in the league to hone his skills. And then that was when I kind of got demoted from the playmaker to he was the playmaker, and I kind of just got to sit and watch for a bit.
You're his Robin to his Batman.
Yeah, seriously. So it was, it's nice. It's so cool to see him now doing what he's doing. And I haven't had him on the podcast yet, but we chat every now and then. And it's,
cool.
Pretty cool. The other guy who was sort of in our age group was Reece Hodge, who plays for the Wallabies.
Yeah. I know Reece. So I played against him a couple of times.
So I played against Reece. He played for the Harbord Harlequins, and I played for the Colorado Cougars when we were growing up. Cool. We versed each other. I've had him on the podcast and caught up since. And
he's a good fella, eh?
He's such a legend. Got to about 13 and I went, surfing's more me than rugby. I enjoyed the team side of rugby, but surfing was a little bit easier training, going to the beach again.
Were you doing both? Were you sort of playing footy and then also out in the surf as well?
So I kind of started surfing at 8 or 9 and started competing at like 10. And then from like 10, 11, 12, I was traveling up and down the East Coast all through every school holidays doing sort of grom comps for surfing. So I remember it was really clearly, I think I would have been about 12 and I had the under 12s regional titles for surfing, but I had the under 12s state titles for rugby union. And it was like a gala long weekend and I kind of like had to surf in the morning and then race and got there in time just for the day one, and then had to surf in the finals the next morning of the surfing, and I raced and got there like as the kickoff had just happened in the first half of like our final, and that was kind of the last straw that my coach was like, I think you got to choose and I just won the regional surfing, and then we won the state for rugby, but I was like, you know what, I can probably follow the surfing a little bit better. So call it quits at about 13, I think, with rugby union, and been all in surfing ever since, up until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so what was it about surfing? Because I think for me, I had a bit of self-reflection and figured out why I loved rugby so much. And for me, it was sort of my place of freedom. Like, I could escape. I found that, you know, when things are going sort of, you know, pear-shaped outside of life or outside of footy, and I could always rely on footy, that when I got on the field, everything would just, I'll be present in the moment. All the noise would be quiet, and it was sort of my place to escape the world. What was surfing like for you? What did it provide you?
I think definitely that, in a way, the sort of escape. I mean, obviously the ocean, you're quite literally disconnected from land. So that was a big part of it for me. I think as well, and this is just upon you saying that and sort of reflecting on it, I just wrote a book, and I wrote a little bit about this throughout the book, is the fact that, I mean, I was good at it. I was quite successful quite early at surfing. I was, you know, quite sporty at everything I tried, but surfing I kind of found not easy, but I progressed and improved quite quickly at a young age. So there was kind of that external validation of, you know, parents, Cooper did so well again in that comp. And, you know, you've got 3 sisters, but it's kind of always you being talked about. So it's always striving to do better and get that sort of external validation. And, you know, as a junior surfer throughout high school, it was okay. I feel like there's quite a lot of young people will relate to sort of being the top athlete in their community and kind of getting all the praise for that. But then it sort of became unhealthy once I got past the regional and the Australia-wide circuit to the international circuit, and, you know, realised that I can't really base that self-worth and identity around the achievements because, you know, they're not always going to be every single final like you can be when you're just competing against kids just in your local area. So, yeah, it was the freedom to, you know, be in nature and do that, but also it brought me that sort of feeling of winning and that feeling of success that, you know, is quite addictive.
It's addictive, especially when you're younger and you're going through, I guess, puberty, and you're a young man, and like when you start getting that sort of that extra attention from the outside and that external validation, it's especially when you're a kid, it's hard to know when to draw the line and understand like what's becoming unhealthy. I think for me, I think my ego took over a lot more and was like sort of loved the fact that I was known for that, and loved the fact that I was getting attention. And I felt as a kid that I didn't get any attention outside of playing footy. So I wasn't at school. You know, I was in the footy boys group, but I wasn't sort of like, you know, the popular kid. I wasn't sort of popular with the girls. I was sort of like in the group, and I kind of like just followed suit. But when I played footy, when I was on the games, that's when I kind of got that attention. That felt really good. I was like, I feel needed. Like I was always first picked to, if you're playing team sports and it's like you're picking sides, I was always first picked, and I was like, fuck, that felt good, because I was terrible at school. I wasn't very, good with my grades. I felt like I had learning difficulties. I was very embarrassed growing up at school that I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt like, I honestly felt embarrassed, like that I wasn't good at anything else. Yeah. But when we played footy, I was just like, yes, like I'm getting that attention. I feel needed, or I feel like people, you know, I felt useful.
Becomes your identity.
It became my identity for sure. And like, I started to link my self-worth with rugby. Did you ever go through that period of linking your self-worth with, you know, Cooper the surfer?
Absolutely. That's like a huge part of my origin story, is sort of up until 21, I was sort of top 3 guys in Australia in surfing, and, you know, had the sponsors, had the, you know, respect of the industry, had the respect of my peers. And then I went from like at 21 years old, I'd almost say like my career peaked at sort of 20, 21, 22. More, maybe even like 19, 20, 21, like my first couple of years on the international tour were my best. So it was kind of like, all right, make it from the junior tour in Australia. You're on the international tour now with Opens. You're 19, you're kind of this hot young Aussie guy coming on the tour. Had a pretty good first year and like cracked it into the top 100 in the global scene, which was good. And then I kind of had like a few years where I just sort of stagnated around, or like between sort of 50 and 80 in the world when it came to surfing. I was kind of on the secondary tour, but in the top little echelon of that. And things were going pretty good, but then it got to sort of early 20s, a few more distractions, you know, girls, partying, traveling the world, surfer, identities wrapped in it, you know, life's
the
pretty
lifestyle,
good. Lifestyle's great. And to be honest, I probably got wrapped up in that a little bit more than I would have liked to in hindsight. But I mean, hindsight's a beautiful thing. I have no regrets with the life I lived and what I got to experience. So it got to that sort of 21, 22 years old and the results started to decline. I was still competitive and still in that top 100 in the world, but I just wasn't getting to that next level. I'd sort of been in the top 3 for my whole career. And then it's like, all right, now you're just kind of part of the pack.
Yeah.
And it sort of made my mental health and sort of my identity struggle quite a bit because, you know, I felt embarrassed, ashamed to be back at my local beach, to be around my friends, my family, my sponsors, because, you know, I wasn't doing that well. There was like questions like, oh, what's going on? And
did you feel like a failure?
Felt like a massive failure, you know. I felt like I, you know, had been given these opportunities from sponsors and people had supported my journey, but then I wasn't, you know, getting the results that I was used to. And then I got this lesson, right around like 22, 23, I just lost my major sponsor. So I went from making, you know, $50,000 to surf to making nothing. My manager at the time was like, no, we'll get you a new one. Like, it'll be fine. You'll find someone that'll be close to that amount of support. Never ended up getting a support like that. And that's when I went into like a massive victim mindset. I was like, you know, fuck this. Like, I'm not getting paid. There's guys that are worse than me that are getting paid way more than me and blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of went into this pretty average mindset and was like thinking about giving it up. But I was like 23. I was still in my sort of prime age.
So young still, yeah.
Yeah. And still ranked like in the top 100 surfers in the world. Like, there's a lot of surfers on the planet. Today in the top 100, you know, it's like being in the top 3 rugby teams on the planet.
Yeah,
it's like I was surfing quite well, but I just hadn't quite cracked it. And then I got invited to the first ever Olympics training camp for surfing, and I knew I wasn't going to make the Olympics team. Sort of the only 2 guys make it for men and women. And they invited the top sort of 12 men and top 12 women from Australian surfing to this introductory to meet the AOC and understand sort of the next 4-year period before the Tokyo Olympics.
Yeah.
And I kind of went into it with like this mindset of like, well, I've lost my sponsor. Like, I don't have that much support. I'm probably not going to make the Olympics, but for one, it's kind of nice that I got invited to this to show like, hey, you're still, you know, one of the top Aussie surfers there is. But then the thing that I kind of realized, because I knew I wasn't going to go to the Olympics, I was like, what can I get out of this training camp that'll be valuable to me rather than just sort of fill in the numbers? And at that camp was really cool. We had like Kathy Freeman did a speech for us, which is cool to like hear her story. This other guy, Ken Wallace, who's a kayaker who won a gold. Mick Fanning did a talk, which was really impressive. But then there's this guy called Ben Crow. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's like a mindset coach. He's a mindset coach for like Ash Barty.
I do. Yeah. I'm familiar with him. Yeah.
Mojo Crow. He does some amazing stuff.
He's incredible.
Mindset. He's epic. And I remember he said something to us that was really powerful. He said, pro surfing is what you guys do, but it's not who you are. And that was the first time that I'd actually really started to think about who I was, you know, outside of surfing. And then a follow-on from that was my psychologist, who was Surfing Australia's psychologist, who was at the camp as well. He said to us, I want everyone to come up with like a personal philosophy to live by. And everyone else kind of rolled their eyes and was just like, oh, whatever. But I was like, oh, I'm going to give this a real good crack. And I sat there for the night and I was like, what's my personal philosophy? And what I wrote down that day was, through hard work, passion and dedication, being a positive influence on my peers and younger generations. Very broad. It can be sort of anything, you know, work hard and be passionate and be a positive influence. It can sort of go anywhere. But from that, I kind of made that my purpose. And from there, I started to try and live to that rather than for external validation, and really try and understand through working with my psychologist and doing a lot of research through my 20s what my personal values are. And if I can anchor my self-worth, my identity and my well-being off how well I live to those values, it becomes in my control rather than, you know, the external of results and validation.
Yeah, 100%. Because that's something that the same sort of story that I went through was I lived and died by my last performance. So if we lost a game, like, I'm a piece of shit, you know? And I was like, well, there's always next week, so I'll just try next week. And it was just a roller coaster of sport. There's always like wins and losses and stuff. And that was the exact same thing. A good rugby friend told me, was like, rugby's what we do. It isn't who we are. And for that moment, I sat back and realized, like, thought about the times that I played my best rugby. What was I feeling? Like, what was going in through my head? And I'll chat to Dad about this. And he's like, you're playing for the love of it. You're playing, like, like you're in the backyard with your brothers and your mates. That's when you're playing like your best footy, when it was just like that carefree. And when you start getting paid to do it, all these pressures starts coming on and all these other external pressures. He's like, that's all well and good, but you got to remember, like, you're playing in the backyard with some of your mates. You got to remember that feeling and remember feelings and try to replicate that on the field. And then I was like, oh, that's true. And I just remember like going out there and thinking, I used to be so scared to stuff up, to fail. And I'll just play into my shell and just try to like not do anything wrong, but also like not take any risks to do anything good. And Dad's like, that's not you, mate. Like, it's not you. That's not how you play footy. If you stuff up, it's all good. It's all good. And then I started to actually start playing like some of the best rugby I've ever played. Was having that fear of failure sort of go away and not sort of tie my self-worth to those wins and losses. And it's something that I think back now, and I learned that a bit later in my career, and I always think back now, and we talked about hindsight, and I was like, oh, I'd love if I learnt that as an 18, 19-year-old, and something that I'm really looking forward to now is getting into footy clubs and talking with young athletes and being that person that I wanted or I needed at that time. And because I talk to some young kids now, and like they're straight out of private schools in Brisbane, and a lot of them have full-time contracts, full-time rugby union contracts, rugby league contracts, straight out of school. I mean, they don't even know the world yet, and they're going straight from year 12 to 100. I think the minimum contract now is 180 grand. And I'm like, they're 17 years old getting paid 180 grand, double what their parents are probably on. And they're expecting to, be this person and understand all these pressures in life. I'm like, man, all the kids that I talk to, they're just like so worried about mistakes and so worried about this and that. I'm like, man, like the love of the sport is already like almost getting drained away before you even have a chance to really enjoy it.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing once you go from it being like a fun hobby to like being everything and like your job, and you're reliant on it for your income. It's like, things change. Did
your mindset change with that? Because I've heard like some people talk about it where when you start getting paid for your hobby or getting paid for that thing that that your love for it, your mindset changes. I remember like when I started getting paid to play footy, I was just like, oh shit, like now they own me. Now like my perception of like how I should play rugby is completely changed just because I'm getting paid to do it.
I guess it's a little bit different with my sport than rugby, because you're playing for a team and it's all anchored on that. But I guess like, I was sponsored by Hurley, the surf brand, for like 7 years, and you're representing them. But I was quite lucky that I started getting paid when I was like in high school already. So it was sort of like year 11 and 12, I think I might have been on like 20 grand or something, which still,
it's incredible.
You're in high school, I'm making like a good little bit of money. So it wasn't like, my first contract, I was like, oh my God, it's changed for me. Like surfing's pretty lifestyle sport. So I was very fortunate in that respect. But it was more so once I stopped getting paid to surf and had to work as a tradie full time to then go and, fund my career, not being caught in the victim mindset, and, just being grateful that I'm still traveling the world surfing, even if I have to, fund it off my own work, doing whatever I had to do to scrape by the money. It was, it's an interesting sort of shift once you go from not getting paid to getting paid, and then vice versa, going the other way. It makes it a tricky one too.
It felt like you not got thrust into the man's world or adult's world, but you developed quite early. Like, you got straight in from high school getting paid to surf, and then straight into, you said 18, 19, 20, like on the pro circuit. Yeah. Did you feel like you either missed out on a bit of your childhood, or do you feel like you matured a little bit earlier? Or
I feel like I got to experience so much so young that so many don't get to.
Yeah.
Through high school, I represented the country and went to like Ecuador, Panama, Peru, and New Zealand for world titles, all while I was in high school. So I began to see all these different cultures and places and understand like how different everywhere around the world is, which was like one thing that was super valuable. There was obviously the challenges that come with traveling quite a bit through high school. Friends would be like, oh, I thought you were away, so I didn't invite you to my party. You'd feel like you'd get left out every now and then. But I also had like a really scattered friendship group. Like none of my friends at school surfed. So I kind of would go to school and hang out with my mates at school. Had like, a good friendship group. I feel like I was in sort of the popular group or whatever. But then I would go to the beach after school and hang out with all my beach mates who went to a different school. And then...
Oh, right.
So I had a like kind of really interesting dynamic of sort of friendship circles when I went through that. And then I also had, especially once I got to year 11 and 12, I had my like pro surfer mates who I'd travel to all the comps around the world with. So I had all these like different communities. So as much as I, missed out on some of the things that kids did through school, I didn't miss out on that much. The one thing I will say that's quite interesting, and it sort of goes off what we've been talking about, is what happens I see with a lot of athletes, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this with my transition part of my story, is a lot of athletes, finish school, they haven't got all these skills that you need to learn how to live, and they, might start getting paid as a footy player a good amount of money, and then they get to like 24, 25, an injury or surfing or, lose your sponsor and you have to go get a job. It's like you're kind of entering what most kids have to do at 17, 18, at 24, 25, and have the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment that comes with that, and usually a skill set that doesn't translate that well outside of like your sport.
Yeah.
So, I was quite aware of that for the whole way, sort of through my career, and that allowed me to build what I did after.
Yeah, well, let's get it, because I same thing. It's like, when I'm 20, getting my first contract, and I remember mum and dad saying, do you want to like think about other things outside of footy? And when you're 20, you think, 30 years old is so far away. I'll worry about that later. Like, all I'm worrying about now is the present, and 30 years old, that's so far. That's 10 years away. Like, that won't come quick. And before you know it, you're 28, 29, and you're thinking, you're not as fast as you was, you're not as fit as you was, you're getting a little bit older, and you're thinking, oh shit, like, I haven't set myself up at all. Like, a lot of some traits, some values and stuff you get from playing a team sport can translate to, team environments and businesses and stuff like that. But in terms of skill sets, like, nothing. Yeah. Nothing. And that's when I sort of got really down in my mental health and having that label as Elliot the rugby player, and then sort of like not having that anymore and going, who am I outside of footy? And then when people sort of ask me like, how's footy going? And I'm like, well, I actually don't play anymore. They're like, what are you doing then? I'm like, good fucking question. Like, what am I doing? And then they're like, oh, well, they didn't mean it in a bad way, but they were like, I just couldn't see you doing anything other than play footy. And I'm like, same. That's why we were in that spot. Like, how did you navigate that time in your life and figure out who are you outside of surfing and what you wanted to do? Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, I felt somewhat lucky that I lost my sponsor, because I had to, work for the part from like 23 till 28 for like 4 or 5 years. At the end of my surfing career, I was working at Manly Surf School to like coach kids and push people in, learn to surf. I worked as a landscaper for a year for a friend who had a landscaping company, sort of carrying pavers and just doing a bunch of random jobs for his big landscaping company. I worked on a building site for another friend who was a carpenter and did 18 months on a building site, and they were all like flexible that I could work for 3 weeks, and then I'd have a week and a half that I'd have to go to South Africa for a surf comp. So because of that, I began to learn like kind of things that I didn't want to do. No judgment against like trade industries, but I just realized, I was looking around at guys that were, in their 50s, 60s, some of them constantly complaining, bodies really in a hard spot. And I was like, is that really the sort of life that I want to lead? Like, I felt like there was more to it, but it also, taught me that work ethic. So while I'm going through that, I'm sort of always thinking like, what else am I going to do? I'm like commentating some of the surf comps a little bit. And then mental health had always been something quite important to me. Obviously, we spoke about the identity thing that I kind of felt in my early 20s. Had been very like forward thinking and worked on that. But I lost an uncle to suicide when I was quite young, and that kind of made me aware of mental illness and, the implications that can come with that. And then my dad struggled a little bit with his mental health through my teen years. So because of this, I had this underlying fear of mental illness, really, of like, maybe I'm going to end up like the men in my family, but also this underlying guilt of who am I to ever talk about mental health problems? I've lived this incredible life. I've traveled the world surfing like for the better part of my life. Sure, it comes with the challenges of the identity and the losses and the pressure, but pretty bloody good when you really look at it. So I felt this like shame and guilt that I can't really ask for help. So because of that, I was always really forward thinking, what little things can I put in place? What sort of research can I do around positive well-being that might help me if I get to a point of struggle? Never had any intention of, doing what I do now. But when I was working in the surf school, running these I did a few surf camps for some of the young surfers, sort of like elite weekends.
And I took them through sort of like nutrition. I took them through board design. I took them through obviously heat strategy and technique. But one of the things I took them all through was like a visualization and meditation little exercise. And after the camp, a lot of the parents sort of said to me and my dad, like, oh, the kids that really loved like the mindfulness and the meditation. Like I would have never thought I could get the kids to sit still for that long, let alone enjoy it. Anyway, I was sitting around the dinner table as a family back in 2018, and my youngest of three sisters, Sophia, was in her last year of high school in year 12. And she just looked kind of upset this one night, and she'd had a pretty tough year at school. They lost a friend in a car accident earlier in the year, her friends in year 12. And then she let us know that one of the boys in her year had taken his own life. And, you know, hearing of youth suicide is one of the most tragic things ever. So much life ahead of these young people that, you know, they do the unthinkable. And my dad saw me kind of visibly, like, you know, kind of upset and frustrated by that. And he was like, oh, you obviously do well talking to the kids from the training camp. And I've seen you over the years really work on your mental health and work with the psychologists and blah, blah, blah. Maybe you could go and talk to some of the kids at your old high school and tell them, you know, your story, and maybe it'll help one or two of them. And I was like, oh yeah, why not? I'm good friends with one of my old school teachers, Woody, and I called him the next day and I was like, did you hear about the suicide at the school around the corner? And he's like, yeah, man, it's so tragic. And I was like, hey, I've got like a bit of a random idea. I've just run these surf camps, taught the kids about meditation and a bit about sort of, and I just done that camp, the Olympics camp I spoke about too, where I'd started to learn this idea of living by a philosophy and kind of just a bit more self-development mindset.
Yeah.
And he's like, mate, that's a great idea. So I went and had a beer with my old school teacher. He's a young dude. He's a friend of mine. And he was like, you're such a legend, like, for wanting to do this. Like, you should call it like the Good Human Factory. Like, they come to the factory and they leave better humans. So that's where the name came from.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
So it wasn't my idea, but anyway.
We'll give him the rap for it.
Yeah. He's got a rap for it, he knows. So anyway, that was kind of how the Good Human Factory started, was I just realized that, you know, kids are taking their life, and if I could maybe help one kid, amazing. So he said to me, go and put together, you know, a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll organise a group of 20 of the students next year. It was like in October, November, so I was about to go to Hawaii for a month of surfing.
Yeah.
So come back term one next year, I'll organise a group of students for you to come and have a chat to, and we'll go from there. I was like, sweet. He was also a very entrepreneurial teacher, and he said to me, which I had no idea about when I first started, but he's like, public speaking is also a very lucrative like industry. If you're good at it and you connect with the students, there's a bit of a career path there. And I was like, I had no idea, but cool, good to have that in the back of mind. But that's where I was also saying throughout my 20s, I was always curious, what is there going to be next? So that kind of sparked a little bit of curiosity around, oh, maybe I could do this as a job one day. So yeah, that was kind of the catalyst of still years of building while competing and working and other stuff. But that was the starting point of what I do now.
Public speaking. Some people, it's the worst thing ever.
It's more feared than death.
How do you like it? Is there that fear in there? Is it excitement? Is it nerves?
I mean, now I'm pretty good with it. Yeah. It's like with what I do, you know, I've done
repetition, isn't it?
I've done like 400 podcast episodes myself, so I'm very comfortable talking.
Yeah.
But when I first started, I was scared for sure, and I was so bad. And I'd look back at my slides, and the slideshow, the PowerPoint was like, I wouldn't have passed a year 6 like bloody assignment. Like, it was so bad. But I started.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing.
I started, and that was the thing. I was like, because I'm sharing my story. It's not like I'm trying to like research and look up info about stuff that I have no idea about. I'm like sharing my story, sharing the things that have worked for me, sharing my experience. And yeah, kids kind of started to like it. The first year, 2019, I think I did 2. I did 1 at my school, and then a family friend was a coach of the local touch footy team, so I did 1 for like Manly Warringah touch footy. Yeah. And because at the same time I'm working full time as a tradie, 50 hours a week when I'm home, plus competing and trying to train to surf, and then I've got this weird mental health thing on the side. So 2019, I wouldn't even say it was a business. It was like 1 or 2 workshops that were terrible. And then 2020 came around and COVID hit, and it kind of really changed my life, to be honest.
And then how did it go from all that to all in with the Good Human Factory?
So 2020 came around, and I was like, okay, I'll do a few more workshops this year, still do the surfing, still competing, still working. And then COVID hit. And at the time I was like working as a tradie building Good Human Factory, might have had like 1 or 2 workshops locked in, not really much. I'd actually just started recording my podcast. So at the end of 2019, I was like, I'll add to the Good Human Factory by doing this podcast.
Yeah.
And with this podcast, because at the start, it was really hard to get your foot in the door to get anyone to book you to come and talk. Naively, I was trying to charge people like $300 or $500 for a talk, which back then I was like, that's amazing to make for a talk. But I actually realized now that it was too little. People thought it was like too cheap to actually want to book you. But because of that, I was just really struggling getting any bookings for my workshops. I didn't have much work at all.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll do the podcast. It'll build some more reputation for the workshops to get more bookings. And then COVID hit and my comps got cancelled. And I was like, what am I going to do here? And JobKeeper came in and my accountant's like, because all your surf comps are cancelled, that's like still majority of your income through prize money compared to your building stuff. You can get on JobKeeper and not work for the next 2 months while your surf comps are cancelled. And I was like, all right, cool. Friend of mine invited me to move to Byron Bay to live for like 2 months at the start. He said to like me and my other friend Alex, we rented this big mansion in Byron because of COVID. No one's booking Airbnb, so we offered them a really cheap rate. Instead of $2,500 a night, we offered them $2,500 a week for 2 months, and they took it. So I was like, all right, I'll move in for 2 months. So I moved to Byron, and I was like, if I'm going to be living on the government's dime, I'm going to make the most of this time and energy to build the Good Human Factory. So I studied a few courses, like a Science of Wellbeing course, did my mental health first aid recap, and just sort of the podcast launched in May then, and that was when it was like the podcast, the workshop started to book a little bit more, not heaps, but the merch, I kind of did my first T-shirts, and like 2020 was kind of when I literally registered the business name and made my first dollar from the Good Human Factory. Was sort of through that end of COVID time, but still took years to build. Like 2021, I still traveled the world surfing and took 4 months off to compete. So
was it hard to let go of surfing?
Yeah,
to make that full switch to
for a long time, especially for the first 2-3 years until I guess I retired, I still connected my self-worth in the Good Human Factory as being I thought it was cool that I was a current pro surfer, still going and competing and juggling it with this. Like I felt pride in the juggle and felt almost like, oh, I don't want to be going somewhere saying, oh, I'm an ex-professional athlete. And I looked, I was 26 at the time, like 27. I was like, I don't want to be an ex-athlete doing this while I'm still so young.
Yeah.
Whereas now I couldn't care less that I tell people I used to be a pro surfer. I was like, but at the time, for years, for the first 2 years, I really thought it was important to be a current pro surfer while doing this. I felt like there was something special about that. But then, 2021 came around, made it onto the international tour again for the competing, and it was like still COVID. So for 4 months we couldn't come home. So I went overseas. I had workshops booked in that I had to cancel because I got like a last minute spot in these events internationally. And I had to like postpone a bunch of workshops. I had to get a friend of mine put all my merch in their warehouse and send all my merch out for me when I was away for 4 months. The podcast had to be put on pause for 4 months. So I just watched like this momentum that I'd built over a year and a half of Good Human Factory just full handbrake, which was amazing because I was still chasing my dream of surfing and making the world tour. Yeah. But that sort of international trip, I was like, my heart wasn't in it.
Was that the first time you felt that your heart wasn't in it?
Not the first time. I'd sort of started to year after year without the sponsor. I was like, what am I doing this for? Like, I'm trying to compete against the guys who are, training full time, working on their equipment, traveling the world, surfing the best waves. And I'm like digging holes for 40 hours a week to then try and go compete. Like, it's just like, and it's a shit excuse to make because definitely there's people who were in my position that have qualified and gone on to massive things. And I have friends that have done that too. So not that there isn't that opportunity, but just in my mindset, I was just like slowly starting to lose the love of sort of the grind. But then that last year, 2021, because I got like a last spot, I missed out by one spot on the international. I was like, oh, well, that's the universe saying, perfect, go focus on the Good Human Factory. And then my biggest sort of competitor my whole career, this guy from Port Macquarie, Matt Banting, he got injured like a week before the 4-month trip was meant to start and pulled out. So the WSL guy calls me and he's like, hey, don't know if you can get your vaccine and your travel and everything sorted, but there's a spot for you on the 5-event tour in America, Portugal, France, and Hawaii, but you got to leave in like 10 days. And I was like, I've got a business now that I run
Yeah.
by myself. Like, oh, what am I going to do here? And I was like, you know what? I've been given this opportunity to go travel the world. Everyone's on lockdown in Australia. I can't really do workshops at school still because of lockdown. So it was still slow, the Good Human Factory, but had a few things. And then I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go. So I packed up my house I was living in, literally put my whole life in my car, in my like Subaru wagon, and packed it to the corners of the car, and then just like left all my life in a car in a friend's garage for 4 months.
Really?
And just went and traveled the world and competed, and went with a different mindset. I went with a mindset which I'm so grateful of, that I knew this was probably going to be the last trip around the world that I was going to do competing. So I got to actually like really enjoy it with my mates, really enjoy the culture of everywhere I went. Met my beautiful partner now who has just done a partner visa with me here in Australia when I was in Portugal. For the event there. She's Brazilian. We got along well. Then she came to France with me. We got along well. Then she came over the year after, and it's been back and forward for the last few years here. So my last trip around the world, I met my soulmate, and
that's the best though.
Yeah,
it all works out.
It all worked out really well.
It all worked out great, and like you're probably more present in the moment. That trip more than you ever have been before. Yeah,
I had such a good time. Like one of my mates, Connor O'Leary, had an epic trip who I travelled with. He won one of the events and qualified for the tour. He's still on there doing really well. My other mate, Wade Carmichael, who I did like most of my career on the road with, but then my last few years I didn't, because he made it to the top tour and I wasn't, so we didn't travel for a few years, so we had a last hurrah together. So it was epic. Did this one last trip around the world where I just got to, hang out with good mates, not without with the pressure of like, you know what, even if I don't make it, I wasn't going to come anyway. Like I wasn't expecting to come anyway, so didn't have my best sort of trip on the tour. I think I had a few pretty good heats and waves, but didn't put together a great tour because, whatever, that's all the excuses I can come up with. But that was the last international trip around the world, 2021.
Wow.
Sounds like yesterday, but it's ages ago.
Yeah, ages ago, yeah. And what is the competitive surfing like? Because I've got a couple of my mates that surf, and I think it's such one of the most natural things you can do is get on a board and just ride a wave, and every wave's different. And then I think adding a competitive nature to that's something so, like, even the surfing lifestyle is such so much freedom in that and self-expression. Do a lot of people, our athletes, struggle with that competitive side?
For sure. There's a lot of guys who will like stick to free surfing kind of thing is the best way to put it, because they're like amazing at surfing but not good under that short amount of time or that pressure. So there's kind of like not two sports, but free surfing is its own thing, and people are sponsored and represent brands and try and help market their products because people just love watching their surfing. But then there's obviously the competitive side, which was what I was far more sort of loved, because I grew up being an athlete when it came to rugby, and I was just like always loved the competitiveness of like winning and that validation that came with it.
Man, it makes me wonder, like, always look at Kelly Slater when he's still surfing, and he's killing it. I don't know, how old is he? 40 something?
No, he's 50.
Is he 50?
51 or 2 now. Yeah,
and
he won Pipe when he was 50. Like, 2 years ago.
I'm thinking, he must be built different. That he's been doing it since he was like competitive, like since he was 16 or something.
Yeah.
And he's still doing it. Like the drive or his mindset must be just out of control. That he just like lives and breathes for that competitiveness.
Yeah, well, I guess at that level, it's like once you're competing, you're usually competing in really good waves, because you saw at the end of his sort of competitive career, he'd lose a fair bit of interest when the waves weren't high quality. But, he's a freak of nature. It baffles me that it's not in the like greatest athlete of all time conversation. His name isn't thrown up there with like Babe Ruth and Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods and
Tiger Woods and like Roger Federer and like all these like freaks.
I guess surfing's not as mainstream, but there's probably more surfers in the world than like
absolutely.
Some of those sports. So
it's definitely not spoken about enough. I think people just think he's just like doesn't age. Like he's just this like young dude that's just killing it all the time.
Yeah, he's wild. I've been back and forward with him on text for like 4 years about coming on my podcast.
Oh, have you?
Eventually I'll get him.
That'd be sick. I'd love to hear that. I don't think he goes on too many, I don't think. So it'd be cool to get his mindset around that, because I've seen a few bits, like little clips of him, and he's just like, seems like such a cool dude, and he's just like, very intelligent,
very aware and very conscious of sort of different things when it comes to sort of health, when it comes to science, when it comes to climate. Like he's very active on socials and shares his opinion quite a lot.
Yeah, it's almost like he was ahead of his time, especially his generation surfing and like what it meant to like be a professional athlete and look after your body, and like speaking about like longevity, like to be still doing it, you know, decades later. It's incredible.
Yeah, mate. Like the competitive advantage you'd have over everyone else if you didn't, you know, drink and party is huge. And it's just like, yeah, that's probably a big part of why he did so well.
Yeah. What do you think was your lowest point? Or did you reach a rock bottom?
Sadly enough, I'd say like some of my lowest points and like were some of the times where I had almost the most going for me. Sort of through the end, like kind of like when I lost my sponsor, not that like that's obviously not something going for me, but you know, I was still healthy. I was still ranked in the top 100 surfers in the world. I was still, you know, there with a fighting chance and had opportunities. But that was like a period of my life just where I felt so much shame and embarrassment that, you know, I hadn't succeeded like I'd hoped to, like my sponsors had hoped me to. That's why they dropped me. So I just felt so much shame and embarrassment. Like I used to always like get on planes and be like, it'd be pretty nice if this plane just crashed. It wasn't my fault. Like I never wanted to take my life, but if it was out of my control, like I don't know if that's like suicidal ideation or anyway, that was kind of just like, I'd be like, if it wasn't my fault, I'd be happy with my existence now to not have to deal with all the challenges that I feel like I deal with in my mind every day, and sleepless nights of, I haven't got enough money to get to this next event, and like my credit card's max. And whereas since then, I've gone through far worse financial, relationship, different, what I would see back then as massive challenges. I've gone through things that are more challenging, but with a different mindset now. So as much as I was probably in the better years of my life, they were probably some of the most like mentally challenging.
Just the way that you were coping with it, and what you probably knew about mental health at that time, and what you know about it now. And going forward to those the chats you have with schools, and it's something that I really love, and it's something I really admire. And when you're standing and, you know, on that stage in front of these kids, what are you hoping to spark in one of them?
I'm hoping they just look at mental health through a different lens. So often and so much of my life, I looked at mental health through the lens of mental illness. You know, you've got depression, anxiety, suicide, these words would all come up. When you'd hear the word mental health, you'd straight away think of that. Whereas the way that I've learned to look at mental health is through the lens of we have mental health and we have mental illness. 20% of us will be affected statistically by mental illness, but 100% of us have mental health. So if all 100% of us learn the scientifically proven strategies to improve our well-being, to release the chemicals that make us feel good in our brain and body, then we're going to have less down in this, 20%. That might come down to 18% of people have a mental illness. If we start to educate and inspire people to look at mental health through a different lens, and I think that lens needs to be, what are the things that I'm doing each day to walk against the treadmill that I call of life, with good mental health is up one end, mental illness is if you fall off the back. It's not a destination, good mental health. You can't just sprint to the end of the treadmill and you're there forever. Not at all. You run to the end and then, a family member passes away and that treadmill feels like it speeds up. It's what are we doing daily to walk against it? And that's what I hope when I get on stage, people leave feeling like, I've got one or two skills that I can walk against that treadmill of life. And they're very simple things what I talk about, things that most people would have heard about, but I try and combine a bit of the science from experts from my podcast, the storytelling from sort of my journey and what I've learned, but then also have some actual techniques that people do. For instance, I talk about gratitude. They fill out a little gratitude note. I talk about mindfulness. We do a little skill, how we connect to our senses. I talk about being kind to yourself and share the science behind breathing correctly and how to breathe. All these really simple things that I look at as like some of the most basic stuff that I could share with audiences. But when you're speaking to a large audience, you've got to try and like sit it somewhere where everyone can get something out of it. So my main thing and the feedback now and, thousands of testimonials that I've had is that is the way that people are hearing it, is like, I feel like there's something I can do, not this sort of fearful, so important, like all the other mental health charities and organizations out there, like Are You OK Day, and all these people that are really focused on crisis support, mental illness. When somebody's really struggling, here's the number to call. Here's how you can spot the signs. It's such an important part of the industry. But I just think it's like, why can't we catch people upstream more and give them the skills so they don't end up needing those services? So I feel like
more proactive,
a lot more proactive, lot more prevention sort of based than sort of crisis based is the way that I try and talk about mental health.
You just said about some of your like testimonials and stuff. Is there a moment? Has there been a moment where, you know, after a chat, after a talk, you think to yourself, "This is exactly why I do this." Even if someone's come up to you and said something, or someone sent you a message about the chat that's stuck with you.
Does one stand out? These chairs are like so comfy, but not comfy sometimes. Is there one testimonial that stands out?
Yeah, stands out that just makes you think, yeah, this is exactly why I do this.
I'll give you a couple of different ones from different things that I do, because the workshops is like one part of my business, and something that it probably makes me, 60-70% of my income, and is a great way to like make impact in those short, sharp things. Every time I do a workshop, I get people to scan a QR and fill out a feedback form for me. So I have like data point. I mean, I've spoken to probably over 60 or 70,000 people now between schools and corporates, and I've got like over 1,500 to 2,000 people have filled out the survey, and 3 questions on the survey. The first one is, did you learn something new about mental health? And I think it's like right now, out of like over 1,000 people have filled it out, 98.7%, I think, said they learned something new about mental health. 98.1% said they'll use the skills they learnt moving forward, and 98.1% said they'll recommend a workshop to others. So to just have that like much positive feedback, and then every one of them writes a testimonial too. So I have like hundreds, like just off the top of my head, one I had the other day was someone just said like, I thought this was just going to be another pro athlete come in and, talk about how good they are basically. But I was pleasantly surprised. This guy like didn't talk about his athlete career at all. He actually gave us some really tangible things that I'm now going to implement into my life. And it's like those people that come in with an assumption and a judgment, to change them is really powerful. But then off the back of that, obviously I have my podcast too, and it's been around now since 2020. And I've had a few from that, which is even cooler because you're not even directing it at somebody, but then they hear something and it helps them. I had this one guy from Adelaide, his name's Zach Heusler. He sent me a DM. This was probably when I was like 15 episodes in, like really early in the podcast. And he sent me a message going like, "Hey mate, just wanted to let you know, me and my brother love your podcast. Unfortunately, my brother lost his battle with mental illness and took his own life last week and left behind a couple-month-old baby. But I just wanted to let you know the impact that you had on me and my brother these last couple months. We love listening to your podcast together. If it's okay, I'd love to mention you in his eulogy at the funeral." And I was just like, I'm just like having these conversations with pro surfers and different people at the start, talking to, about some deep and heavy stuff. But he's like, to say that it had an impact on him and his brother, and obviously unfortunately lost his life. But what came from that was I'd just done a giveaway with my merch where I was picking a person from anywhere in Australia to fly them to the Gold Coast to hang out with me and my ambassadors. And I just picked the competition. I said to this Zach guy, I was like, "Hey mate, obviously you're going through a lot right now. I'd like so honoured for what you just messaged me. I'd love to fly you to the Gold Coast to spend a bit of time with me and my mates, just, have a bit of escape from what you're going through." And he's like, "Oh, that'd be great." So I flew him to the Gold Inn, hung out for a few days and wakeboarded with my mates who are like world champs. I went motorbike riding and surfing, and he just had the best time. And we became mates. He went on my podcast and he shared his story, which is super powerful. But then I went to, and we've stayed friends over the years, and I went to his wedding last year, maybe the year before. Anyway, I went to his wedding, and that was when I realized the impact that I'd had on his life, because I had like one by one, every one of his family members and friends who were at his wedding come up to me and say like how much of an impact flying him up and, the podcast and everything had on him after that fact. So that was like something that, that was really special. And then the other thing that I do, this like 1% community, which we can talk about if you want, my book that I just wrote.
Yeah.
And like the 1% community, what the idea of it is. But from that, I've got like I think in that community there's been like over 1 million gratitude sent in, and same thing, I just have like hundreds of testimonials from feedback from people just saying like it's like changed my life.
It's incredible.
So that's the stuff that like means more. Like, and then the podcast and the community stuff is all free as well, so it's nice to know that there's no barrier to access except for a device, and people can get these things that can profoundly impact their life positively.
What are some misunderstandings that adults have about young people's mental health?
It's a good question. I think it's just evolving really quickly, mental health. I mean, not mental health, but I just think the world, technology's changing so much. So I think older people find it quite hard to empathize with young people and don't understand the pressures that come with social media, the pressure that comes with comparing yourself that a lot of young people do. So I think it's quite misunderstood. Older people to younger people is probably the most thing that was probably the question. What's misunderstood about it? But yeah, I just think like how big of an impact like social media and technology has on our mental health, and it's just unknown. Like what looking at a screen for many hours of a day from such a young age is going to have on development of people. So I think but I mean, there's plenty of old people, what's old though, but the struggle as well. Like mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter. Like one of the highest suicide rates is in like over 65 men who have just lost their partner. People like die of broken hearts and just want to leave. So, it doesn't matter if obviously the young people's mental health is declining. But I think just as a whole, people's mental health is struggling.
Yeah, and that's just interesting just to hear about what you find and when you go to schools and chat with these kids, and some of the things that they're going through is some things that we've never gone through at all. Like when I went to school, there was no social media when I was at school. Like I don't know the ins and outs of what cyberbullying and that sort of thing. I have no idea. I've never experienced it. And they're the things that like this new wave of social media and this new wave of sort of mental health is hitting these kids is something that we've never experienced. And I think that disconnect is just like not understanding. And trying to empathize, like how severe is it?
Yeah.
And having like, I'm sure you've talked about it before, is like having so much social media and having so much social interaction online that we're actually so disconnected away from our phones. I chat to, I work away in the mines, and I've got these two good mates. They're both 21, and they're just full of anxiety. Full of it, like, and social anxiety, and I'm thinking they can't go anywhere by themselves. They're like, we go to the gym after work together, and they're like, I'll say to them, I'm not going today, I'll go tomorrow, and they're like, we can't go without you, and I'm like, why is that? And they don't like going in public alone. I go, why is that? He goes, people will be looking at me. I go, mate, no one's looking at you. And I talk about it, and we think about like they've grown up sort of having that relationship on Snapchat or a relationship on Instagram, and then you think about COVID, and a lot of them couldn't go to school, so a lot of their relationships with their friends were all online. So and then that sort of carries over till outside of school, and then they lose that ability to have conversations, and that's where we learn a lot of our like social skills, is having awkward conversations or saying something you shouldn't have, and that's how you learn. And I think a lot of those kids are sort of almost skipping that stage and going straight from kids to adulthood and not having that learning that social interaction.
For sure. And just like you're watching on social media, everyone posts like the best part about their day, and you're thinking like
the highlight reel.
Everyone just sees the highlight reel. So I'm intrigued to see where the next sort of chapter of the world's going to go when it comes to technology and everything else.
What do you think are the warning signs with teens with their mental health that often go unnoticed?
I'll definitely firstly precursor that I'm not a psychologist, and like I try my best, like I said, to really come from the mental health angle, not the mental illness angle. But I mean, with young people, I think just when you start to see them becoming distant is like the biggest one. If they're kind of trying to, not do what they usually do, not spend time with their friends, just trying to, sit at home and not get out and about is a big sign. Grades at school is another one. If grades are suddenly declining, it's like usually a pretty good time to go and ask your kid what's going on, like why, non-judgmentally, but just trying to dig a little bit deeper. But I think the other thing is like just learning to have conversations as parents. Like I had an amazing family growing up, but I talk about this quite often, we never really had the relationship to go much deeper. It was always about, you're doing well in the sport, well done. It's like, it was always, it wasn't like it's what you're doing, it's not how you're doing. And I think there's more space for that. And to get better at that, we have to have more conversations. We need to, as adults, learn how to communicate and connect better, so then that could be passed on to our kids. And, we only really know what we've been modeled when we grow up. So you can either complain about it, or you can be like, okay, that was just how I grew up. I can now pivot and do something differently. So, yeah, I think just parents being able to communicate more with their kids, which can become difficult because now kids find it really hard to communicate.
You find it really hard. And that's something that, I felt the exact same way. My dad came from a very abusive alcoholic family where, feelings and emotions were sort of preyed upon. So without him even knowing or realizing it, he sort of brought that into him as a father, where he didn't want any sort of violence or alcohol, anything like that in the house. So our house was extremely peaceful, safe, secure place. But the deep emotional connection of chatting to your kids and to your mum and dad just wasn't there. And I'll never blame them. I'll never hold resentment. They did the best they could with what they had. But now, sort of fast forward now, a lot of my issues sort of growing up was feeling like I couldn't talk to them just because it wasn't modeled to me as a kid. So I just grew up in the same pattern, in the same environment, and thinking like, oh, well, I'll just be quiet about it because that's how I sort of got brought up. And it's beautiful to see. I had my dad on the podcast and we spoke in depth about his childhood and my sort of downfall with my mental health, and because I kept it a secret from him as well. So we both didn't like talk to each other about things. And I said, how about we come on the podcast and we both open up? So it was one of my favorite podcasts. But since then, like, our relationship has been completely different. Like how we talk to each other, the things that we talk about, it's so much more deeper than you had a good game of footy. What are you doing on the weekend? How's work going? Like that's barely even like spoken about now, which is something that I'm really grateful for. And, looking back, I would have loved to have it, as we were a bit younger. But I look forward now when I'm a father. That's one of the first things that I want to be implementing, is having that open dialogue earlier on, and like even just understanding and putting words to feelings, or understanding what that feeling is. I remember some of the things that I really struggled with was not only feeling the way that I did, but knowing how to express it, putting words to it, and like I just couldn't. I couldn't articulate how I was feeling. I didn't know what words to use. I didn't know what that word meant. And they're the things that I really sort of focus on now. And even like chatting to kids and going to rugby clubs and understanding that like these feelings are going to come up, but it's okay. And this is how you sort of cope with it. Rather, I went and saw Gabor Mate, and he says something really powerful. A lady got up and she said, how do I not pass on my trauma to my kids? And one of the most powerful things he said was, don't hide your kids from reality. A lot of people, a lot of mothers, a lot of fathers, if something's bad's going on, they'll try to protect them and not, shield them and not tell them the truth. He goes, don't ever lie to them. Your kids will always know when you're lying. He goes, your role as a parent shouldn't be to hide your kids from reality. Your role should be able to help your kids cope with reality. So put in ways and tools that they can cope with reality. Otherwise, kids find their own ways. And I found my own ways. I went to drugs and alcohol, especially being in the footy scene. That's a very accepted thing to do. And I found instantly that was my remedy for all the things that were going on in my head. And I just thought, man, like even the back of my head thinking, this is a terrible thing. I'm trying to be a professional athlete, but at the same time, I'm doing drugs and alcohol like an addict, and that was my way to cope with what was going on in my head. So there's so many learnings that, I'm trying not to put too much pressure on myself when I have kids, because there's so many things that I want to implement, but I think they're the sort of the key things that I want to bring forward. I
love what you said there. It's such an interesting one with, protecting and shielding your children. Like, obviously there's a time and place to share certain things that don't need to be shared, but something that I read somewhere and it made so much sense to me is like, when you lie to your kids, like you said, they generally already know. It's telling them to not trust their intuition, which can be really, negative on their development, is because, they're thinking they know something's up and then you tell them it's not, so they're not trusting what they're feeling, even though they were right. So just trying to like learn to be honest is, pretty powerful.
Pretty powerful, yeah. What does a mentally healthy life look like for you?
Oh, a mentally healthy life looks like, to me, being able to move through challenges without, moving backwards. And I think, for me, good mental health is your ability to be resilient through hard times. So the way that I kind of describe it, as I say, this treadmill is, for me, good mental health is when you do enough work that you're far enough up the treadmill that when something really tough happens, which is inevitable for all of us, you've got a bit of space before you fall off that treadmill. You've got the skills to walk back against it before you fall off and jump into the net that we do have here, you know, from Lifeline to psychologists. Like, there's so many great things here in Australia and mental health charities that are there to catch us if we fall off that treadmill. But for me, good mental health is when you do the work to be far enough up the treadmill that when, you know, you lose a job, you don't completely freak out. You go, okay, like, I can deal with this. A family member passes away suddenly. It's not falling straight off the treadmill. It's, no, I can deal with this. I'm in a mentally healthy place. So for me, that looks like just doing the small things daily that I know help, like, good for my mental health. And I literally just wrote a book about it. So,
did you?
Yeah.
So what are those good things? Because everyone's got their own sort of things that help them cope with their own mental health. I've got sort of a checklist that I sort of go through. You know, I had to stop playing footy because I was getting too many concussions, and it was really affecting. It's when I started to notice my own mental health was declining and my mood swings, and it made me really pursue my own mental health. And I went down a path of seeing a psychiatrist and putting me on a spectrum of bipolar, and it's something that actually really like connects all the dots to how I am as a person and some of the things and how I respond to things. And even talking to my parents and my friends and stuff, they were just like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, someone could have told me a little bit earlier. But yeah, well, what are some of the things that you sort of, that helps you stay grounded and helps you stay in a good headspace?
So I've got 10 healthy habits that I
Yes.
I keep alluding to. I just finished a 60,000 word manuscript a week ago today, so it's like
incredible,
getting edited at the moment. But the third part of my book is around 10 healthy habits that I've learned through experts on my podcast, from neuroscientists, psychologists, Olympic gold medalists, different people who I've seen living sort of healthy, mentally healthy and happy lives. And the 10 sort of daily habits are and for a bit of context, I have a wall on my a whiteboard at home that me and my partner have that has like 7 days of the week down by 10 of the habits, and we try and tick them off each day. And we're far from perfect. Like, out of the 70 that we try and get, we might only get like 50 or 40 a week. Like, it's not about being perfect, but it's about doing some of these things. So first one is breath work. I've been a big fan of Wim Hof's breath work and spent some time with Wim and spoken at a conference with him, but also just love the idea of the science behind our breath. It's so powerful. So every day I try and do breath work. I don't do it every day, but that's on my list. Meditation's another really important one. There's not many people who are frequent meditators that you wouldn't look at and think they're calm and present people, which I think is kind of the goal in life, is to have peace of mind. So the second one's meditation. Third one is getting in nature every day, trying to spend a few moments, feet on the grass, feet in the dirt, sand, just spending some moments with the body connected to nature. There's so much great science behind grounding and, our electromagnetic fields, and just spending time in nature as well. Like, there's a lot of great science about people who spend time in nature, how much better their mental health is. Fourth one is nutritious eating, making sure, I'm eating whole foods, eating stuff from farmers markets, and spending time actually preparing food with my partner. Exercise or movement, pretty common, obvious one, but there's so much great science that shows, exercise is so critical for our mental health as well. What else do I have on there? Recovery. So for me, that looks like trying to spend a few moments before bed each night stretching, just getting the body actually rolled out, spending time in sauna or ice baths if I get the opportunity to, and if I'm like injured or stuff, actually seeing a professional if I need to. What else do I have on there? Self-care, which for me includes like getting the right amount of sleep each night, setting up my environment to sleep well, and making sure that I have, the best opportunity to sleep well. What else on the list? Communication. So like as a couple or with a friend, or actually having a deeper conversation than like, oh, how are you going sort of thing each day. Once again, a lot of great science and data shows that like loneliness is one of the major epidemics in the world. Being able to communicate and connect is so important for our mental health. What am I missing off there? Or limiting screen time as well is like a big thing that I try and do. Once again, all these things we know are bad for us, but we need to set the boundaries and the parameters to keep doing them consistently. So for me, it looks like having a boundary of no phone after, or screens after 7 p.m. or before 6 a.m. Also trying to spend, 20 to 30 minutes each day either reading or watching a documentary or doing some sort of learning. So don't know if I hit all 10 there. I probably missed one or two. But anyway, they're kind of an idea of like having an actual list of trying to do them. And then, in the book I explain like the science behind each of those things, my story behind each of them, expert from my podcast story behind it. And then, how we can try and integrate it. And like I said, all those things, like I'm rare to hit all of them.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing a few of them each day, I feel like I'm walking up that treadmill to get myself up to the positive end.
And that's the thing. I think people might get a little bit overwhelmed and think they need to be hitting all of them and they need to be perfect. And it's just like, it's not about being perfect. It's about like making those small changes every day, and stacking those days up. It's just like, you don't have to be perfect every single day, but if you do those couple of things over, months, years, your life will change dramatically.
That's the thing. I always say to people, like and this is what the book's called, it's called the 1% Good Club. And my theory is if we all gave 1% of our day to our mental health, we'd be living in a different place. And 1% of 24 hours is 14 minutes and 24 seconds. So if you round it down to 14 minutes, everyone listening hopefully can probably agree, you know what, it's the biggest killer of people aged 14 to 45 in the country. It's pretty important. And most of us aren't doing much for it. So my challenge to anyone listening is to try and give 1% of your day to your mental health, whether it be, sitting down and meditating for a few moments, practicing. Oh, I missed the main one. Gratitude's one of the other things on my list as well, which is something that, I've practiced for the past 4 years every single day and built a community who do the same thing with me. And it's profound the impact that, doing the small things consistently will have.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we do this, me and Jordan do a gratitude thing where we, before we go to bed, we're in bed together, before we go to sleep, it's just like 3 things that worked well for you today. And it's just like, obviously you can't name the same thing, all got to be different. It just makes you like really think about all the good things that's happened during that day. Probably not things, we always go for, 3 things that has worked well for us. And it just makes you think about all the positive things that happened to your life. Massive fan of your podcast.
Thank you.
It's amazing. Has it been a favorite episode? Has it been people ask me this and I'm like, oh, it hasn't been a favorite one, but has it been one that's really, really meant the most to you?
Meant the most to me. There's a few that have definitely like impacted me and taught me some lessons that are really powerful. One that really impacted me, and it's the only one that I really wrote in depth about in my book, so that's a good sign that it was probably one of the most impactful, was this lady that I spoke to from South Africa. Her name's Candice Mama, and she was she got voted one of Vogue Paris's most inspiring women in the world next to Michelle Obama a couple of years ago. So her story, fascinating. So I met her at a conference that I spoke at Luna Park back in 2023, one that was Wim Hof, that I met Wim Hof at actually. And she did a talk called The Kindness Economy. I actually had to miss hers because we had a clash of timings. I met her after the event and we got talking, and my mate who threw the event was telling me all about her, and he's like, you got to meet this lady, she's amazing. Didn't know too much about her story. We got chatting at the after party and I was like, I'd love to have you on the podcast. Don't tell me too much about your story. So I have her on the podcast and then I start chatting to her. So she's this black lady from South Africa, and she grew up and her dad was murdered in 1992 in the apartheid movement. So I don't know if you know much about the apartheid kind of. Yeah, so the apartheid movement was basically segregation and humiliation of blacks in Africa. Terrible, terrible things went on, and her dad got murdered. Her dad was quite a high up officer working for one of the resistance kind of people. Anyway, so he was murdered, and then her story goes like this: why she became such an inspiring person. She went through her sort of teen years. She got when she was like 12, she found this book that was like a book on people from the apartheid, because it had been finished by then. Mandela was released from prison, and like a few years later, it all got quashed. Anyway, she found this book where there was a story about her dad and had a photo of him like burnt alive, which is how he died. He got shot in a car and then the car torched. Anyway, so she found this photo in this book that her mum had been talking around. She had like gnarly PTSD from it. For years, she went to the doctor in her late teen years, and they were like you're almost about like she almost had a heart attack just because she had such gnarly stress and PTSD in her body. And the doctor said, like, I've never seen stress like this in the body of a young person. Like, whatever's going on for you, like, is going to kill you if you don't change something. And then she was like, that's when it dawned on me, this guy who killed my father is now killing me because of, the trauma. Anyway, fast forward a few years, she gets like 22 and she gets invited, and her family get invited to go to the prison to meet the guy who killed her father as like a repatriation kind of thing. Anyway, so they go meet him, and the guy comes round, meets all her family, and apologises to all of them. Then the mum forgives him, and then the brother forgives him, and gets around to her, Candace, and she's like, asks him this question, like, do you forgive yourself? And he's like, I hope that no one would ever ask me that, because he's in jail for 82 murders for all the other people that he'd killed. Anyway, he's like, I'll never forgive myself. They have a breakdown moment. She gives him a hug and forgives him. And then she started to really critically think about it. Like, this guy is no different to somebody going to war for an army and having to, we don't send soldiers to prison when they get home for crimes they've committed. Why is this guy in prison for doing what the head of his party ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize, who ordered him to do these murders, but he's rotting in prison for his whole life on 82 counts of murder. So she advocated for him to be released, and he got released from prison. So she became this global icon for forgiveness. And now she's like this best-selling author, incredible public speaker around kindness. And her whole thing was like, just around like how important forgiveness is and empathy and looking at things through different lenses. And that was just something that, ever since has really impacted me. If she can forgive the guy who murdered her father, then, the guy who cut you off in traffic, you can probably get over it.
Fuck, it puts into perspective, doesn't it? That is crazy.
It's the craziest fucking story. And her story keeps going. But go check out Candace Mama. I think she's episode 101 on my podcast.
Yeah, that's incredible. I would love to know and the difference in her body once that forgiveness came, to see all that stress, all that PTSD. Did you talk to her about that? Did it all eventually?
Oh, I'd have to go back and fully re-listen to it. But it's a fascinating chat. Just the way that she talks about kindness, and she talks about when she got out, got him, advocated to get him out, all of the other families from the 82 people who, had family members murdered, not all of them go against her, some understood, but just like, how much it meant to her to just be like, no, like, I'm not going to let this ruin my life too. And now she's, this global icon and beautiful, beautiful lady. She's really, really cool, Candace.
Fuck, that is insane.
Yeah, there you go. There's one that profoundly impacted me.
That is insane. I've had
plenty of cool chats. Nina Kennedy, Olympic gold medalist. She was really interesting. And Zach Stubblety-Cook, Olympic gold medalist, like NFL star, a friend. And, I've had plenty of athletes from NRL and AFL. But
what has it taught you most about yourself?
About myself?
Yeah.
To be honest, it's taught me how privileged I am.
Yeah.
Just as much as I've had my challenges, I've got a family that is still together, that loves me. When you've spoken to over 200 people in depth about their whole life story, you begin to realize how different we all are, and you begin to have so much more empathy for everyone that you meet. But then what I've learned about me is, I'm once again, I haven't come from the privilege that I've got other friends that have come from, but the fact that I've got parents that love me, that I've got sisters that love me, that are healthy, that I've got, people around me that care about me, that's probably what I've learned, because I've spoken to so many people, who have come from very different upbringings, who have come from broken homes, who have gone through hell and back and devastating injuries, devastating autoimmune illnesses and terminal illnesses and, spinal cord injuries. Like, so many people have gone through so many challenges that the podcast has allowed me to reflect on the fact that I'm very, very fortunate.
Such a privilege, eh?
Yeah.
You talked about your dad had his struggles with his own mental health, and maybe the dialogue wasn't as great as it is now. Do you have open chats with him about his own mental health?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, we're actually catching up tomorrow to do a podcast.
Oh, are you?
We did one together a couple years ago, and he kind of was like, oh, I don't really like it. He was a bit self-judgmental of himself, so he's like, don't put it out. And I was like, whatever, all good. But I've got episode 200 coming out in like 2 weeks, and episode 100 I had a friend of mine interview me. So I was like, episode 200 I'll interview my dad.
Yeah, sick.
And he's ready to do it, so he's up here at the moment for Easter.
You're looking forward to it?
Yeah, it should be cool. I'm going to do that tomorrow with him.
Yeah.
But about mental health, yeah, one of the things that kind of was a big part of his struggle with was alcohol. Never like super gnarly, but gnarly enough that my mum was like, "You've either got to stop drinking alcohol or it's me or the alcohol." You know, it was never like abusive physically, but just would, you know, be a bit sloppy and, you know, just, yeah. So he hasn't had a drink in 12 years, my dad.
Good on him.
So 12 years sober. Ever since that, he's just become a different person, especially I'd like to think with his mental health. You know, he still has his challenges and feels, you know, pressures of life and, feels like he's missing out and he's, you know, different because he doesn't drink with everyone and doesn't have that big of a social life. But yeah, we're super open. He's so proud of me and what I do, and he just tells me every day like that the work that I do and the chats that I have with people help him profoundly. So, you know, if the only person that gets some help out of the work that I do is my dad, then that'd be enough for me. So yeah, he's doing good, my dad. But yeah, I'll have a chat tomorrow for the podcast and go through his journey.
Man, that'll be awesome. Do you think as men it's the stigma's still around, or you think in terms of speaking about their mental health, or do you think that stigma's slowly dying?
I think it's slowly dying, but I just think it's important. Like, obviously it's so important to be able to talk about our mental health, but I think it's also really important to take responsibility and do something for your mental health. So many people who struggle with their mental health is because of their own actions and their own lifestyle choices, which I empathize with, that, you know, sometimes we struggle and don't have the, you know, willpower to go and do things that are better for us. And then also some people, you know, don't have the socioeconomic status to put themselves in a position. So I do really empathize with people like that. But there is also people in those situations that do live a happy life as well because of the mindset that they go through life with. So yeah, I think there definitely is obviously more open dialogue about men and men's mental health. But I think it's also important that we start to, you know, put our own hand up and be like, you know what am I doing for my mental health? It's great that there is these conversations being had and people to talk to if we do get to that point of struggle. But I think it's really important that we also go like, well, what am I doing for myself if I need other people to help me too?
I think the culture is shifting. I think especially,
for sure.
I'm seeing a massive change even with, we got a couple of young fellas that play in our TRL team on Monday nights, and just hearing them talk about mental health, hearing them even talk about like, they go on like 6 months no drinking, you know, things, and I'm just like, I would never have done that at your age. And they're like, yeah, no, well, it's terrible for you, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, it is. I'm glad that you guys have that awareness and it's all like common spoke about now, and they're always thinking about like, nah, I can't do that. I've got to get at least 10, 8 or 9 hours sleep tonight. I'm like, oh, I love this. I love this because it was never like that when I was sort of coming through it all.
How old are you?
I'm 33.
Okay, yeah, I'm 30. I'm 31 in a couple of weeks. So
yeah, I'm 34 in a couple of weeks actually. What's something, either a you know, an emotion or a feeling, something that you still struggle with today?
What's something I struggle with today? I think the thing that I struggle with the most is kind of, I mean, I'd say imposter syndrome of just sort of like, who am I to be talking about the stuff that I do? But now I kind of have the feedback and testimonials to cover that. But I think for me, it's sort of comparison to others who, you know, have kids and have a house and sort of set themselves up in that financial and that kind of white picket fence sort of story that we all get told. But I'm also pretty okay with it too. So that's probably the thing that I struggle with, is going between like, yeah, but I've created my own path. It's a sick life. I'm enjoying every day. Like, it's great.
Yeah.
But then also the feeling of, yeah, but it'd be nice to be paying a mortgage off rather than paying rent somewhere. It'd be nice to, you know, be raising a family and, you know, be in a situation that's different. But I think that's just, everybody feels that.
Yeah,
that
the grass is always greener.
Yeah, the grass is always greener. But yeah.
When it's all said and done, what does being a good human mean to you?
Oof, when it's all said and done, I think being a good human means to me today, right now, is living strong to your own personal values. Because I feel like when you do that, you're in control. And if it's, you know, you do the work on yourself and understand what values make you feel good, then the byproduct of living to those values is good mental health. And like, as we touched on in my workshop, like the 5 values that I try and live by every day: responsibility first and foremost. Like, we have to, as I've said before, put your hand up if you want to, see changes. You need to do something to change. So for me, the first step's responsibility, realizing that we have to have agency over our actions in life. Second one's gratitude. Every day you can make a choice to look for the negatives or the positives. There's going to be both in every single day. It's fine to focus on the negatives sometimes, but at least for a few moments a day to really try and shine the light on the positives. The other one's mindfulness, being able to, actually be present with people and be mindful is so important, and not enough of us do it. Other one's empathy. Putting yourself in other people's shoes. Candace's story is a perfect example of why empathy is so important. And then the last one's kindness. Like, we can always be a little bit kinder to ourselves through, the food we eat, the amount of sleep we get, the exercise we do, all those habits I touched on earlier. Being kind to others as well is super important, and then being kind to the environment. So I'm like, if I'm living to those sort of 5 values each day, then I think that's what being a good human is for me.
Man, I love that. We got some quick fire questions to finish. You can answer these quickly or as long as you want. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Ooh, best advice I've ever received. The act of confidence comes before the feeling of confidence.
Oh, I love that. What's been the hardest day of your life?
Hardest day of my life? The day my grandma passed away. It's tough. My family was in Bali for my older sister's wedding, who is married to Fisher, and we're at their wedding, had a beautiful time. My pop couldn't come over to the wedding because he was overweight and couldn't get insured to come to Bali, and had ulcers on his legs, so couldn't come, but my grandma came. Anyway, I flew home early after the wedding because I had a surf comp, and all the family stayed in Bali for an extra week. I get a phone call. I'm about to head up to the Central Coast for a surf comp at Avoca. And I was in Sydney at the time. I remember it so clearly. I was getting a chiropractor treatment from a friend of mine. I was face down on the table. I got out of the table and I had a bunch of calls from my sisters who were still in Bali. And I was just about to go to a meeting at Apple, actually. The first time I'd had a big meeting with Apple. I'd done some work with them over the years, which is really cool. And it was the first one I'd ever had with them.
Yeah,
so I was all excited, getting off the table. I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, this is a bit weird. So I call my sister and she's like, Grandma's being rushed to hospital. Something's gone, she's not well and it's not looking good. And I was like, this is like gnarly. I'd lost my other grandma, but we weren't as close, whereas my grandma was like super close with all of us. Anyway, so I'm like, whoa. And she's like, I'll call you back once we know more. And I was like, fuck, hectic. So I go sit at like a Macca's to get ready for this Apple meeting, and just in all sorts. I got like a Coke and fries, and I don't think I even ate a chip. And then I get a call from my sister saying like, yeah, she didn't make it. She passed away. And, obviously losing family members is really sad for everyone, but I was like, whoa, this is like gnarly. None of my family's there. So I don't have my mum, my dad, my sisters. No one's there. I'm home by myself to sort of, be with. But then my pop's at home and no one else is home. So I have to drive over to my pop's house and tell him that his wife of 55 years has died, who was meant to get a flight home that night to be with him the next day. So I drive over the bridge, I don't know. I remember just like being like out of body, almost trying to drive, get there, like try and, calm myself down before having to go and talk to my pop. Luckily, as I walked in the door, I realized one of my uncles was there who had to come on from the wedding early too because of work. So he just got there, who's like his son, my uncle, and is like my pop's son. So he kind of been the first point of letting him know, which must have been like
how do you do
so
that?
Hard.
How do you do that?
But I just remember walking in and my pop just like wailing his eyes out and just saying like, I'll never do. And I sat with him because my uncle was on the phone to family for, all around the world. So I just had to sit with him for like an hour, just like bawling his eyes out, like inconsolable, just like, I'll never forgive myself, mate. I should have been there with her, like blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, didn't get to say bye to it. So that was probably the, hardest day of my life.
Fuck.
It's a tough one.
How have you defined success?
I used to define success as like winning
Mm.
is probably like, you know, if I'm doing well and I'm winning surf contests, I'm successful. Whereas now I think success to me is living to those values every single day. That's in my control. So if it's in my control and I can do that, then I think that's what success is to me.
Love that. Who's your hero?
My dad.
Your dad.
Yeah.
Always?
I mean, through my surf career, we probably butted heads more than I'd like to admit, just because, you know, there was a bit of ego that came with that end of teen years, surfing, you know, sponsorship, bit of ego getting stroked by people. So he'd give me advice and I'd sort of push back against it. And we never had a bad relationship, but there was definitely a bit of animosity there, probably in the late teens, early 20s. But as I, you know, have gotten older, I've started to really realise, you know, that our parents are just there trying their best to help us everywhere they can. And
It's their first time at life too.
yeah, it's their first time doing it. So yeah, I'd say my dad's probably my hero.
I love that. If you could go back to a time in your life, where would you go and why?
If I could go back to a time, where would I go and why? I'd probably go to this one day of surfing I had in the Mentawai Islands with like 6 of my mates on a boat trip for a magazine, Waves magazine, and it was just like
The best day.
the best day of surfing ever, and it was just us, and it was like big and perfect, and like 12 hours straight of just like unbelievably perfect waves.
Yeah, I love that. What's one question that I didn't ask you today that I probably should have?
I'll whip myself in here, but it could have asked, what's the 1% good club?
What's the 1% good club?
There's 2 things actually.
Yeah.
So the 1% good club started, I kind of alluded to it a little bit in here, but basically back in 2021 when it was just right before I went overseas on that international last surfing comp trip. I was sitting there doing a meditation, and I'd been running some workshops and telling people how good meditation was, and I knew deep down I wasn't doing it every day. And I was doing this one day, and I was meditating like 10 minutes guided and couldn't slow my mind down like most of us. And I had this thought of like, surely we can give 1% of our day to our mental health. And then couldn't drop the thought. And then I was like, what's the math? And started trying to do the math of 1% of 24 hours in my head. And I was like, sat up about 5 minutes into a 10-minute meditation, got my calculator out and typed it in and worked it out that it was 14 minutes and 24 seconds. So I was like, surely we can give 1%. And then there's also a lot of great studies out there that show that you're far more likely to maintain a healthy habit if you have an accountability group around you. So I was like, what's 2 things that we can do that we could fill for 14 minutes a day that are good for your mental health? And I was like, meditation and gratitude, like 2 of the most lowest hanging fruits. They cost nothing. They have so much scientific evidence to show that it's good for you, but it takes a bit of time. So 10-minute meditation in the morning, 4 minutes gratitude at night. There we go. We've given 1% of our day to our mental health. But I was like, how can I make this, more than just me doing this? I need the accountability. So I was like, I put on Instagram, anyone who wants to join me, I'll create a group chat. Every day I'll send a 10-minute meditation for you to click in the morning. Every single night I'll put 3 things on my story, what I'm grateful for, send it in the group, and then you can write your 3 gratitudes. I think first day like 20 people signed up or something. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And that's been going for 1,500 days straight. I haven't missed 1,470 days. I've missed a couple days, but I've kept the streak going per se. But yeah, so for
That's
almost
years.
for almost 4 years now, coming up 4 years, I've done it every day. The community's grown to over 2,500 people. I'll show you actually. Where's my phone?
That is sick.
So I have 2,500 people that every single day will send 3 things they're grateful for on their Instagram. And then every single morning I send a meditation for them to try. And yeah, now there's like 15 group chats, and across these group chats there's been over 1 million gratitudes sent in over, like, if you look, there's just like people writing like 3 things from Sunday what I'm grateful for. But that's like every day for 4 years, send the meditation in the morning. So that's what the 1% Good Club is. It's a free community for people to stay committed to 1% of their day for their mental health. And yeah, the evidence that I've had from thousands of people who have said, oh my God, this has actually finally kept me consistent meditating. Oh, I've never, lived looking through the lens of gratitude like I do now, because I have to think of 3 things every night in the community. I have to look well and through the day for good things, and hey, my life just seems to be better. And then the extension from that is then the book, which is called the 1% Good Club as well, which is the extension of, hey, I've done this community for 4 years and seen the evidence from, anecdotal evidence from thousands of people, the impact this can have. Let's add to bare minimum should be 1% meditation, gratitude, or whatever works for you. But then the book becomes the extension of like, here's my journey, here's the community and the business that I've built, and here's all these different 10 healthy habits that I encourage you to add to your life, and at least do one of them for 14 minutes a day, and then you're part of the 1% good club. So that's kind of my theory, is that we should do that 1% of your day for your mental health. And that's what the 1% good club is. So anyone who's in the community, anyone who's in the future read the book will be part of the club. So it's not just like, here, read about Cooper Chapman and the Good Human Factor. It's once you've read this, you've learnt the skills to be able to do 14 minutes a day.
You're part of the club.
Yeah.
And when's the book out?
October 10. It says October 3rd on some of the bookstores. I got to chat to my publisher, but I think World Mental Health Day, October 10 is the goal.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Definitely October, which is Mental Health Month.
And it's also like a byproduct of you guys doing that 1% club, doing the group chat. It's everyone's being accountable, but it's also what you go back to. That isolation is like one of the biggest drivers for depression, and you've got 2,500 people there. Yes, they're all doing the gratitude thing, but they're all keeping each other accountable. You all got their own community there, and everyone's like probably reading everyone else's sort of gratitude thing. Everyone's staying connected. It's an amazing thing.
It's insane. I'll have to add you into one, but because in group chats you can only have 250 in them now. At one stage it was only 32 in a group chat, and at one stage I had like 32 different groups, like 30 with 30. It was only 900. Like I think I had more, like the amount of people. But then luckily they changed Instagram to have 250 in a group chat.
I think we've got to change it again.
I know, but where I was going to go with that is exactly like what you just said. It's created these micro communities. So every group has a number. So it's like, I'm in group 7, I'm in group 9. And if you're in 2,500, you'd kind of get lost in the pack. Whereas now all the groups, there's probably only like 20 to 30 out of the 200 in each group that are active each day. But those 20 to 30 will be like, oh, today was pretty challenging, but I'm grateful for this, this, and this. And you'll have 10 people be like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear it's challenging. Reach out if you need a chat. It's like these micro communities of strangers from all around the world have been built, and they like, I don't even have to show up anymore. If I miss like a week, they'll still send a meditation in, and they'll do the gratitudes. Like it's not, me, it's just providing them a vehicle to do what they...
Yeah, and I feel like that's real life. Like I feel like a lot of people get stuck on that social media where they see the highlight reels and they see all the good, and they think that's life. I think that's real life, but it isn't. I think what you create in those communities, and where you have struggles, you have your ups, you have your downs, and you sort of talk about it and communicate it. That's actually like the real essence of life and deeper communications and connections, isn't it? Like,
for sure.
Rather than like, looking at the social media, looking at the Instagram, and people sort of have that comparison and think, why isn't my life like that? Whereas like those group chats are exactly what life is.
For sure. It's just the daily, like
the daily,
if you're on top of it.
Have you any questions for me?
Oh, I mean, we could go for another whole podcast if I'm being completely honest. I'm pretty good at questions. Where'd you play footy and where'd you grow up?
So I grew up, born and bred on the sunny coast.
Yeah.
Played all my footy there, and then I went to a rugby league school on the sunny coast, and then ended up playing Mountain Creek. Okay. I don't know if you've done a workshop there at all. No. And then was sort of going rugby league, rugby union, and then I went in the army. Like my dad had a rule. My dad was like, you either go to uni, you get a trade, you go traveling. You're not sticking around the house. You're not. As soon as you graduate, you're out of the house. Or not out of the house, but you're off doing something. Yeah. Like you're studying, you're learning, you've got a trade, you're developing a skill, or you don't want that. Go traveling. Traveling is one of the best things for you as well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, shit. So my older brother, really smart person, really really smart person. He got into engineering and down in UQ, and then he was like, actually, if Dad's offering this, this time to go overseas, I might just go overseas for a gap year or something. That gap year ended up being 7 years overseas, and completely changed his outlook on life and everything like that. But I was like, umming and ahhing. I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't take footy that seriously, and I was like, I was good, but I was like, I'll never do it professionally, and I didn't really rate myself very highly. And I remember Dad came home with an army brochure and just like flopped it in my lap, and he was just like, "What do you reckon?" And I was like, I had one look at it, I was like, yeah, why not? He's like, get in the car, then we're going to sign you up right now. And I'm like, just going into grade 12. And I'm like, oh shit. Oh, yeah, righto then. And then because I knew that I was going in the army, knew that I didn't need to get an OP, I changed all my subjects for grade 12. So I was at a sports school and I had to do English and maths. They were compulsory, but I changed it all. I did touch footy, rugby league class, volleyball class, basketball class, tennis. One of the classes was surfing, so I joined the surfing class. We went down to Alex Beach every morning and went for a surf for a couple of hours and went into school. Everyone else was stressing about OPs, and my grade 12 year was one of the funnest years I've ever had in my life. But then hit reality when I went to schoolies, and 1 week after leaving schoolies, I was on a bus heading down to Wagga Wagga down in New South Wales, and then all of a sudden I'm getting my head shaved and I've got the army camos on and I'm thinking, oh shit, like what's going on here? But it was one of the biggest things I ever could have done for my development straight out of school. Like I was so sheltered as a kid. I was so privileged and looked after and mothered, and I had everything I ever needed or wanted. I was still such a child at 17 years old. Like, I needed to grow up big time, and it was no better way to grow up than being thrust into the man's world, into the army with, everyone in their 20s and 30s, and it made me sort of look after myself and what it took to be a man and have these values and what life you want to lead. And yeah, it was. I look back at it now, and it's just like it was one of the hardest times, but also one of the funnest times. And I learned a lot of like valuable lessons. And I saw some pretty heavy shit around wars around the world. And
Wait, how long were you in the army for?
I was in the army 4 years.
And you fully
No, so they would
deported,
desensitize you to what was going overseas. So they'll show you every day. They'll show you videos of conflicts, combat, man, just to try to desensitize you from what your job is. Because if they send you over there, they don't want you to freeze up. They want you to do your job. So they always show you stuff and show you what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I had an option to. I had a corporal in there, and he was like, we would always play touch footy and stuff. He's like, you're kind of good, and I'm like, you reckon? And he's like, have you given it a shot? And I was like, nah, I just thought I'd just be in the army. And he was just like, you can always come back in the army. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I just don't think I would ever make it. And he was like, yeah, but you're never going to know unless you find out. And if you don't, you can just re-enlist straight back in it again. And I had a point where if I signed on for another 4 years, I would have gone straight to Afghanistan. If I got out, I had like a couple of months to sort of like figure out what I want to do. And if I got out, I was pretty much like running the risk of like playing professional rugby, right? And I didn't know what to do, and like I was like, look, I may as well like do what he said. I may as well like get out, and if it doesn't happen, give it like 3 or 4 years. If I don't look like getting any contracts, I'll just re-enlist. And I remember like getting out, playing footy on the sunny coast, and within less than 12 months, I had a contract to play in New Zealand. And I was over there sort of on and off for a few years, mixed up with sort of Aussie rugby sevens, seven-a-side sort of stuff. And sevens was sort of like something that I pursued a lot. I tried to, make the teams for the Olympics and that sort of thing. And then while all this was happening, I was getting sort of a lot of concussions, a lot of head knocks. And I got told, I got a contract at 21, and it was one of the worst knockouts I've ever had. It was terrible. I had post-concussion syndrome. You would have heard of it.
Keegan and
a few
other people on my podcast about it. It's gnarly.
It's gnarly. So I got told that there's no cure, there's no remedy, you can't fix it. It's a time thing. I had it for 6 months, and it was terrible. I had vertigo. I was vomiting. I couldn't exercise. I couldn't leave the house. I was in a dark room.
Have you heard of India Robinson?
Yes.
I've had her on twice, and her story's fucking crazy.
Crazy, and it really scared me, man. Like I couldn't exercise. If I went to sleep, I was having gnarly like migraines and headaches, and I'd wake up in the morning, and I had to train myself when I woke up not to quickly like get out of bed or just like rise out of bed, because it was something happening with my brain that all the blood would rush to the head. I was faint.
Wow.
So when I wake up, I'd have to like give myself a bit of time and then slowly get out of bed. And that was me for about 6 months. And, I got severely depressed and started resenting rugby, but then like what we got back to was my identity. So I was 21, like I just started sort of, my career. I was like, I can't quit now. Like, what have I got nothing behind me. Yeah. And then I had doctors say to me, like, look, you probably should give it up. And I'm 21. I'm like, nah, stuff
that. Army behind you though. You had a couple of years.
Exactly. Yeah, I could have easily gone back into the army, but I was like, you know what? Yeah, stuff, like I'll keep playing. And I had, every other knockout or head knock since was, after that period, was just like torture. Like I was getting, because I had such a bad one, any small knock to my head would just be like a massive one. And I kept playing, man. I went over to America and had a season over in Boston, which was amazing. I traveled the world. Like I went to all around the Asia and the Philippines and Fiji. And
it's so fascinating that you like didn't go like such a. I mean, we will have you on my podcast, by the way, because I'm fascinated to go even more in depth in this. But it's so curious to me that it wasn't you went to the footy school, but then you said you're going to go to the army. So there obviously was a talent. Do you ever think back and go, I wish I gave that extra 4 years to footy instead of that? But I mean, if you've got the head knocks,
my life has been riddled with me doubting my ability. Always. I always thought I could never achieve the things that I wanted to achieve. I was always, even the heights that I reached and the things that I've done and the stadiums I played in front of and all the amazing things that if someone was looking from the outside in, they would think, oh, you've had a great career. Deep down, I left so much in the tank. Like I regret so much of that time where I was so afraid to actually give it a good crack. I always played safe in the safe zone. I always didn't want to go beyond what I was capable of. I was just living in fear. Fear. I thought it was fear of failure, but the more I thought about it, I think I feared my own success. I feared what I could become, and I always undersold myself, and that's been like one of the biggest things is like learning to get rid of is that even when I'm doing the podcast or those sorts of things is giving it my all. I always thought that I would quit when things got tough and I'd always give up. And I hated that about me. I hated that quality about me that I would just do the bare minimum of work just to say that I've tried. But deep down, I think to myself, did you actually give it 100% though? I don't think I've given like rugby 100% go. And that's when I think about that, I'm like, man, what happens if I did? I play the what if game, and you can't play it because I love my life and I love who I am and I love the people I have in my life and I love the perspective I have on my life now. But sometimes I'm like, oh, what if I actually did give it a crack? What happens if I, when I was, 16 and making these teams, what happens if I actually knuckled down and sorted my shit out and actually gave it a good crack? Because I played with people that weren't that talented, but they just stuck at it and they really set boundaries in place and dedicated themselves and put sacrifices. And I didn't do any of that. I think I relied on pure natural ability. And I always think that I relied on that natural ability through my whole career and actually never actually put enough effort and hard work into it.
Yeah, hard work always beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Have you ever read Grit by Angela Duckworth?
No, I haven't, but I need to.
Phenomenal book when it comes to that. I read that my early or mid-20s, one of the first kind of self-development books I read. I'm the same boat though. There's definitely so many stones that I left unturned. I think especially when it came to the partying and enjoying myself. But I also look back without regrets because I'm like, I can make a choice for the rest of my life to look back with regrets, or I can look back and say I traveled the world surfing with my friends for my best part of my life.
It's the way you look at it, isn't it?
So I'm like, what? I'll choose to look back. I just want to say one thing that just it's sitting at the front of my mind from when you said in the army you did all this sort of desensitizing training. How important that is because you don't know how you're going to feel when you get into a situation like that. Because I had a conversation with a friend last night. So my partner's Brazilian and her best friend's this young Brazilian girl here. And we were just talking about, what were we talking about? We were talking about Brazil being dangerous basically and gnarly stuff happening. My girlfriend's friend's name's Pam and she's like, yeah, I haven't had too many gnarly things happen. And we were getting talking. She's like, oh, actually I used to work in a bank and we got robbed once. And I was like, you're involved in a bank robbery and you didn't think that was like something gnarly? And she's like, it actually happened pretty often, like at the banks in Brazil, because, you know, like people would just come and rob banks all the time. And as long as no one, and I was like, it's so counterintuitive, but this is why I want to bring it back to desensitizing. Like once you're in the situation, you'd freak out. Whereas if you've seen it a bunch, you wouldn't. She's like, no, what everyone kind of knows in the bank is to never press a button and ring the police, because that's when it gets dangerous. When the police show up and the people inside start freaking out, they're like, I don't need to protect fucking this bank's money. So
I don't need to make it worse either.
Yeah, I don't need to make it worse. Yeah. So she's like, I was sitting there talking to the guys that were robbing the bank, like asking them like, oh, where are you guys from? Like,
what are you spending the money on?
Yeah, like she literally said, she was like, I was just calm. Her dad's a police officer, by the way. But she's like, I was just calm because she's like, me being scared is going to make the situation worse. So she's like, I just was chatting to them, no one pressed the buzzer, and they took the money and they left. And I was like, it just reminded me of this, that she was like, how are you like that? I would have been freaking the fuck out if I was involved in a bank robbery.
I think it definitely affected me later on in life, watching, just being at that age and understanding what life is actually like. You know, you see it you watch movies and you know it's a movie. And then you watch it on a big screen and everyone's got helmet cams on and they're actually like, you see them killing people and you're going, fuck, that's actually nothing like the movies. That is, well, the way a body falls is nothing like the movies. The way the blood spatters is nothing like the movies. And you're thinking, holy shit, like, and it makes you think, oh, what have I got myself into? You know, why am I doing this? Like, why are we at war? And it makes you really question like your motives and what you want to sacrifice and the reasons why you're doing it, you know? And like, I've got some really close mates that ended up deploying overseas and they never came back the same, you know, and I've got roommates that I was in basic training with that never came back at all, you know, and I've got a really close mate who came to the podcast and, you know, he's one of my best mates in the world, but when he went into the army, he was stationed in Sydney, so we just didn't have that same connection that we once did. And he told me like all the struggles that he went through, you know, after deployment and discharging and going back into civilian life and the struggle that is when we talk about isolation and you go from a team environment where you can relate to everyone to, you know, going back into civilian world where you're struggling with so many things, but everyone around you have no idea or can't relate to anything you've gone through because it's such a, you know, a niche thing going to war and seeing that stuff. And I think it took him 7 or 8 years to come back to his old self pretty much. So although that I saw, and that was such a good foundation for me, you know, growing up, is going to the army, I actually count myself very lucky that I didn't actually go overseas. I think everyone's different. I think everyone's deployment's different, but even mum and dad say that to me now. They're like, "We're glad you went in there, but we're also glad that you didn't get deployed."
Yeah, there's a few things he said there. Like I have so much respect and admiration for people who serve their country, and like I have different, you know, I've had guests on that have done amazing things. I've got different friends, but I just like look at war, like you said, and you start to watch this stuff, and you're like what's like. It baffles me that there's these people who can't get along who are meant to be the leaders of our country, and because they can't get along, everyone, like all these people have to go and
suffer for it.
Yeah, suffer and sacrifice themselves because you guys can't get along. Like one disagreement with two people can turn into millions of people.
And it's not
thousands of people dying, and then sometimes they're not even disagreements. Sometimes they're set up. I mean, fuck, we can do another whole podcast about the American government and the wars that they're in.
And that's the thing. Like, I think a lot of people think about the soldiers, the men and women that serve, and the sacrifices that they have to go through. But something that I've really learned is actually about their families too. Like they'll be without them for 8 or 9 months, right? And a lot of the time you can't talk to them, and so you actually don't know what's going on, and they're left without a significant other, like trying to struggle with their life and the pressures that their families have to go through. To be in that sort of military life, the military family, it's brutal, man.
Yeah, it's so gnarly.
It's so gnarly.
I did a breathwork facilitator retreat a couple of weeks ago with Cool to Be Conscious, and one of the guys at my retreat was a veteran that was like 19 years in the army, he'd been out for a couple of years, and now he's does like life coaching and getting his breathwork certificate. But he shared something with us all which was just so powerful, where he said like, we're all kind of sharing, like, because we were doing these big breathwork releases and having like big, anger and crying fits. And he had a share with us saying that like he didn't come home for the birth of his first child because he was like, oh, we're going to have more kids and stuff, and never did. And he's like, that's the one thing that like I just like regret so much from the army is like, not getting to come home for my, the birth of my child. And I'm just like, the sacrifice that people give because, other people can't get along is just like
a false idea or
crazy.
A false hope. Yeah, it is brutal. Cooper, mate, thank you.
We can talk forever. We'll have you on my if you enjoyed listening to us chat.
Yeah, man.
And have Elliot on my podcast very shortly. Where are you from? Are you here on the Goldie?
Oh, I'm actually on the sunny coast, but I'm here more than I am on the sunny coast. Yeah, I'm down here almost all the time recording episodes. So I was just chatting to Dean before, and he's like, "When are you moving down here?" I was like, "Oh, probably needs to be soon, I think." Man, it's so good to meet you. Like I've admired you from afar and online and watching all your content, and I think you're such a real leader in the space, and you're such a good example of what a good human should be. And I really appreciate everything you're doing, and looking forward to the book launch. Can't wait for that to come out, and we'll put all the details in the show notes down the bottom. And again, mate, appreciate it.
No, thanks so much. It's been a really fun chat. We've gone to places that I normally don't go. It's normally very structured when people interview me. So you did a really good job. So thanks so much for tuning in.
I've actually got a closing tradition where I don't ask the last question. I get friends and family. They send in questions for the guest.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of...
Oh, you got more? Oh, perfect. So we're not done. They actually have sent a video question.
Yeah.
Oh, sick. This is cool.
Some of them are videos, some of them are audios.
Great tradition. So it wasn't over the episode.
So who we got? We've got your mate, Corey.
Oh, Corey.
We got Corey.
Oh, no way. Do you know Corey, or you just reached out to some of my mates?
Just reached out to some of your buddies.
Oh,
I actually reached out to some of your family members, but they didn't get back to me. So.
Oh, really? But Chloe's probably really hard to get. Sophia should have written back, yeah?
No, none of them got back to me. That's all right.
Oh. Did you ask Dean upstairs?
Yeah, we got Dean one.
Okay. Corey's a good one. So for anyone who want context, Corey's my best mate who's a current world champion wakeboarder. He was at my house last night for Easter before flying this morning to America for 4 months because he's got to go compete over there for wakeboarding.
Really?
So bit of backstory on Corey.
Love that. So he's got two for you.
Okay.
Has the transition from athlete to business person been everything you imagine it would have been?
I mean, it's hard to sort of think, like, imagine what it would be. It's so different. Like, if you asked me, Corey's met me basically when I started the Good Human Factory at like 2021. I would have met Corey. So, like, after I'd launched it for a year or two. But I mean, I think it's been more than I'd hoped for. I feel like most people, you hear stories of like, oh, you start a business, it takes you 4 or 5 to even get one that somewhat takes off. And not that I even think what I'm doing is a business. I look at it like a movement or
purpose.
A community that, luckily enough, supports me now. But yeah, it wasn't anything I expected it to be. And if I knew how much work it would be to get to the point that I'm at now, I mightn't have done it. But it's been a great transition.
Awesome.
Very lucky.
One thing more. What has he got here? Being in the situation you are now in, would you have changed anything you did?
I mean, from a business point of view, no, just because like I am where I am now.
From a life point of view?
From a life point of view, I mean, I just would have been kinder to myself first and foremost, and kinder to others, especially through that sort of probably 14 to 22-year-old period. I would have, even probably 14 to 24, 25 until I started the Good Human Factor. I would have been a bit kinder, but that's why we're here.
Learn and grow.
Yeah.
I haven't heard this yet.
Who's it from?
It's from Dean. So this could be.
Okay. For Dean, context for everyone, Dean, we're in his studio. Another friend of mine is a pro mountain bike rider that's now retired and owns a podcast studio.
You have a lot of high performance friends, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I kind of, ever since I moved up to the Goldie, like all of my friends just became sort of top in their sport of.
Yeah. Alrighty. All right, Elliot. All right, Cooper. This is Dean on the line. Long-time listener, first-time caller. My question for Cooper is, when was the exact point you knew that your career was shifting from surfing to this new direction of the Good Humans Factory and everything else that come along with that, with your speaking, with your book, with all of that? But I want to know the exact moment when you realized that change was here and when you actually accepted that change and realized that this was the new path you were going down, and then how long from that moment to when you realized that that was the right choice?
Good
Very
question.
interested to know.
Good question, Dean. I feel like we kind of touched on it throughout this podcast, but I'd say the time when it was a hard one because for a long time, like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I was worried that I'd be viewed as, oh, he's an ex-pro surfer. What's the point of listening to what this guy's talking about? So I think the time that I really leant over that and went who cares if you're an ex-pro surfer and this is what you're doing now, would have been when I got home from my trip in 2021. So probably early 2022. So 2 years into building the business, or 3 years into building the business before I felt okay, I can let go of surfing.
Comfortable.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Amazing.
Mate, thank you very much again.
Thank you. That was good fun.
It was
Loved
good fun.
it. That was epic.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Mind Your Head. If you'd like to support the show, be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really supports the show and helps others discover us. Don't forget to join us on Instagram and TikTok at mindyourhead.podcast.